Hello, welcome back to my book club. Today we're going to be reading Chapter 1, How Emotionally Immature Parents Affect Their Adult Children's Lives. Right away, I highlighted the first sentence. Emotional loneliness comes from not having enough emotional intimacy with other people. Growing up in a family with emotionally immature parents is a lonely experience. These parents may feel and act totally normal, caring for their children's physical health and providing meals and safety, but that emotional connection is missing. Gibson makes sure to say that children have no way of identifying a lack of emotional intimacy in their relationship with a parent. It's because they're children. It isn't a concept they have. Gibson goes on to contrast mature parents with immature parents, saying, with a mature parent, the child's remedy for loneliness is simply to go to the parent for emotional connection. But with immature parents who are scared of deep feelings, you may be left with an uneasy sense of shame for needing comforting. As we'll see later on in the chapter, these children can have a superficially normal adult life, but their loneliness can continue into adulthood if they aren't careful. She describes emotional intimacy as having someone you can tell anything to. You feel completely safe, whether in the form of words, an exchange of looks, or just being together quietly in a state of connection. Emotionally engaged parents make children feel that they always have someone to go to. They're attuned to their children, noticing their moods and welcoming their feelings with interest. There's a strong connection. On the other hand, emotionally immature parents are so self-preoccupied that they don't notice their children's inner experiences. They discount feelings and fear emotional intimacy. This ends up creating a cycle where these reactions shut down children's instinctive urge to reach out. She makes sure to say once again, as a child, you had no way of knowing that this was normal. This type of loneliness isn't an odd or senseless feeling. It's the predictable result of growing up without sufficient empathy from others. Throughout this chapter, she includes different stories to support her point. So in both David and Rhonda's story, it's about how they felt isolated. I have here that David said, I was utterly isolated. It was a fact of my existence. It just felt normal. I had no way of knowing that most people didn't feel that way. Rhonda tells a small story about moving and being in front of the moving truck outside of her family's old house. And although she was sad, she talked about how her parents were totally unavailable to me. I was too anxious to share anything with them. I knew it was on me to cope with this alone. A message within emotional loneliness. This kind of emotional pain and loneliness is actually a healthy message. Once you start listening to your emotions instead of shutting them down, they will guide you toward an authentic connection with others. This is something that Gibson points to later when talking about instincts. Gibson goes on to describe how children cope with emotional loneliness. They just want to make some kind of connection. They may take on a role of helping others. Unfortunately, this tends to create even more loneliness. It is common for these children to grow up quickly and become self-sufficient. That makes sense for wanting to grow up so fast because they believe it offers freedom and a chance to belong. But without healing that childhood wound, that loneliness can continue into adulthood. Here, Gibson goes further with that, saying, if the lack of emotional connection with emotionally immature parents is so painful, why do so many people end up in similarly frustrating relationships in adulthood, just continuing that cycle? She says that denial is part of it. Denial makes us repeat the same situation over and over. I think that's so important why in the introduction Gibson stressed being self-aware. This is supported by Sophie's story talking about her boyfriend Jerry of several years. After going to therapy for some time, Sophie ends up realizing that her mother and Jerry had a lot in common in their insensitivity to people's feelings. Every time Sophie tried to tell them how she felt, she ended up feeling invalidated. Here, Gibson goes on to talk about feeling guilty for being unhappy. At the beginning of the chapter, she highlighted how adults who were raised like this may have a superficially stable life. And this is what she says: I have it all, they're likely to say. I should be happy. Why do I feel so miserable? Their physical needs were met in childhood, while emotional needs remained unfulfilled. She highlights, though, that few of these people walk into my office with the thought that their lack of satisfying emotional intimacy started in childhood. That's part of the awareness that these people know something is wrong now, and pausing and reflecting on the past leads to something different. A quick note that Gibson says that emotional loneliness transcends gender. Emotional connection is a basic human need, regardless of gender. She then goes on to say that children who feel they cannot engage their parents emotionally often try to strengthen their connection by playing whatever roles they believe their parents want them to. They believe that if they want closeness, they must play a role. And I wrote love as conditional as an act. This is supported in Jake's story, where Jake has this pressure to make his wife Kayla happy. I should be a person who is super happy, like she is. I need to make her feel loved and keep her happy. That's the way it's supposed to be. After going to therapy and confronting his needs, he realized he was uncomfortable with a reference to his own emotions. During childhood, Jake had gotten the message from his mother that showing any emotional needs meant he was weak. Further, if he didn't act how she wanted him to, he felt inadequate and unloved. Gibson now transitions into a different topic. Instead of partners and spouses, feeling trapped and taking care of parents, saying it isn't only in romantic relationships that people may feel deep emotional loneliness. It can play out with friends or parents. This is evident in Louisa's story, who is a single school teacher in her late 20s, who felt completely dominated by her controlling mother, a gruff ex-policewoman who expected Louise to live with her and take care of her. I highlighted here that tendency to take care of others is evident in being a school teacher as her job. Earlier, I said that Gibson would touch on instincts. Emotionally immature parents don't know how to validate their children's feelings and instincts. Because of that, these children grow up learning not being able to trust their own emotions or their instincts. Gibson goes on to say, as a human being, you can trust yourself to know when you're emotionally satisfied. But for children who grow up like this, they need to learn it from someone else or somewhere else. This is evident in Megan's story, where she was dating someone and the relationship just didn't feel right to her. She said neither her husband nor her parents could understand why she wasn't satisfied. She couldn't find the words to defend her feelings. That's a good sign that although she doesn't have the skills, some part of her instincts are telling her that something isn't right. After going to therapy, is that her family didn't want to hear her. Her husband and parents weren't trying to understand. Gibson goes on to make a very great point where Mutual emotional responsiveness is the single most essential ingredient in human relationships. Keyword being mutual. Both parties need to have emotional responsiveness. Neither he nor her parents listened. Instead, they responded with what they wanted her to do, the classic egocentric response of emotionally immature people. Near the end, she's starting to question what she really wants. I want them to matter the most to someone. Is that too much to ask? Gibson takes another turn to talk about self-confidence, how children who are raised by immature parents may lack confidence that others could be interested in them. She talks about the fear that by expecting past rejection to repeat itself, these children end up stifling themselves and promoting more emotional loneliness. The two stories that she highlights both play into this fear. Ben had suffered from anxiety and depression for most of his life, and he was expected to wait until the adults were ready to pay attention to him. This showed up in his relationship, where he wasn't open to sharing his emotions or allowing his emotional needs to be filled by his partner. He ended up describing to his therapist that he should be more self-reliant, saying, I should be able to weather this on my own. Isn't it up to me to meet my own emotional needs? And let me say, it isn't up to you. Emotional needs are filled by other people. In a different story for Charlotte, she had self-confidence issues for her job. She was a successful newspaper journalist who was afraid to enter a contest. And to her astonishment, she won. This was because in her past, she was criticized and shamed by her parents for trying to stand out. So in her job, she wasn't trying to stand out. That plays a little bit into what Gibson brings up next, where childhood loneliness is beneath adult success. Some intelligent, resilient people somehow manifest the confidence to pursue good careers and reach high levels of achievement. That's evident in Natalie's story, who has a successful career but still takes care of her elderly mother. Natalie has felt the responsibility of her mother's emotional state. Meanwhile, Natalie was on her own because her mother wasn't a person she could turn to. I highlighted here that these capable kids may seem like they can parent themselves, but they can't. No child can. Gibson makes it a point here to ask why it feels so bad to live without emotional connection. There's a reason why people have such a strong need for emotional connection with others. Throughout human evolution, being part of a group has always meant more safety and less stress. So when you're looking for a deep emotional connection, remind yourself that your personal feelings are not just coming from your history, but also from human genetic history. Finally, the summary. A lack of emotional intimacy creates emotional loneliness in both children and adults. Unfortunately, emotionally immature parents are usually too uncomfortable with closeness to give their children the deep emotional connection they need. Parental neglect and rejection in childhood can adversely affect self-confidence and relationships in adulthood. Understanding how your parents' emotional immaturity has affected you is the best way to avoid repeating the past in your adult relationships. To that end, in the next chapter, we'll look at the hallmark characteristics of emotionally immature parents. My biggest takeaway from the chapter was that everyone needs emotional intimacy and connection. No matter who you are, your gender, how old you are, your culture, it's part of being human. Thank you so much for reading this chapter with me. Tune in next week for when we go through chapter 2.